So what would be next? We could go through some of these, and that's totally fine, but I'm not going to do that yet. First thing I'm going to do is show you how you would swap out this for a different style of road, because it might be that you don't want this single lane thing at all. You might want the double lane or the freeway, highway, motorway style mesh. You know, and that just makes it easier for you to design, or it's more accurate to what you want to design. So let's do that first. This essentially is found in the meshes folder of the Snappy Roads folder. So if we were to open this up and then look down what we have here, you have a variation of things. We have our props, roads, vehicles, and self-explanatory. You would obviously be looking into the roads folder, and we have here a nice range of preset kind of things that we can use, such as freeways. 6-lane kind of 6-lane only has intersections and things like that. 4-lane is a bit more dynamic in its options. Then you have your 2 lanes and your 1 lane, which is what you're seeing here. So before we look into intersections, we're just going to stick with our standard old road pieces. Now, when you're first looking at these, you might be like, "Oh God, there's a bit much. What do I start with?" And obviously, the first thing to kind of identify is your standard road piece within these folders. And by that I mean, you know, this single lane road, if we were to go to here, is comprised of this chunk. Let's say this asset, this static mesh makes up this spline. It's a copy of this being repeated throughout the spline to kind of make up our trail, or our road, sorry. And that's this one here. But first you need to identify where that is within this selection of tabs. This might be a good time for us to run through them, but I'm not going to do that because I don't want to confuse you. Now, if I remember correctly, road spline. Is this the one? I believe this is the one. So we have in here our road spline meshes. This is an array element which contains the static mesh used to form the spline. And you can see here we have the chosen asset, which you could browse to by hitting this button, and it will take you to the exact asset that is used within the folder. And you can see it was the one that we were already looking at that is used here. So you can probably guess, if we wanted to swap this out, we need to then choose an alternative. So I'm going to just jump to 2 lane, and we go through these. You can see crossing, intersections, various intersections, and then we have our actual road piece. It's usually in a similar position all the way up to probably the freeway, which is slightly different. But, you know, we found the one we want. We have the place that we have to replace, and then we would just simply grab, drag, and you should get this blue highlight, which indicates that you're doing the right thing. And then you let go, and it replaces the mesh with the chosen one. The chosen one. So there we go. You can see it's as easy as that. And then it's just the same deal that allows you to manipulate just the same. And that works again if we were to go to the 4 lane, find our actual road piece and drag that in. We now have our 4 lane. Pretty good, pretty easy, pretty simple, clear as a bell, I hope. What would be next? So let us say that let's just make a piece of road. Let's just make a nice decent piece of road. I'm going to kind of go up here like that. Grab a tangent, give it a bit of a curve for the hill. Grab another piece, maybe rotate a little bit like that. Alt select. Start to, you know, one thing I've realized is if you just, you know, get your points to kind of meet the ground, the next sort of stage will help a lot. This will help with the next stage quite a lot, sorry, with it looking fairly natural. And I'm just actually rotating the main control node rather than these the tangents at the moment. Okay, so we've laid out like a decent chunk of the road at the moment. I'm gonna actually just grab this one, and you see you get these kind of tight. Once you have like a really long distance placed between nodes, some of these others that are really close together don't really enjoy that. So you've got to kind of find a happy medium and figure out, you know, the best kind of setup for the road you want, for the layout you want, sorry. So I'm just doing this to kind of get a nice distance road. I'm just going to put this over. Oh. What have I done? Okay. Press G, sorry about that. Okay. I'm just going to try again. I did backspace a lot. I panicked there. You see, you hear me panic. Okay. So, again. I didn't know what I did. I didn't realize I pressed G. So I'm going to just create a nice long road again. Get it roughly so it's kind of out of view for our level. Bring that up here. Something like this. Maybe bring it over to this little crevice. And then do one more pull. Bring it down. Maybe to here. And then one little pull. Make it go down the hill. And maybe curve it out of view. Alright. So if I was to press escape, you can kind of see what I'm sort of trying to do. Okay, now you can see that we're starting to get this really long road, but things don't quite, you know, seem right. They seem like the quality is diminishing as we add more and more to the scene. And you're right, that is what is happening, really. It's getting worse and worse the more we add stuff to it. Now, the reason this is because at the moment it is set up to have a predefined amount of these pieces for each road, which is a optimization kind of thing, to create less meshes within the scene, which ultimately would improve performance, of course. But if you are getting to this stage and you think that's just not enough, it's just not enough detail for what I want, for whatever reason, there is a way to increase that. So I'm just going to collapse this road spline tab here, and then we're going to go up to this one up here, collision and performance. So we open this one up. You can see that we've got some collision settings, a button for updating collisions, etc. Right at the bottom here we have max meshes per spline. Currently we're set to 21, so this entire length is made up of 21 meshes. And as you can imagine, if we were to increase this value, suddenly you get more pieces, and it is simple as that. Now, if you want this to be a kind of preset value, you can change it. Excuse me, I had to have a little sip of water. you can change it in the BP and update your BP, but I'm not going to bother with that for now. I'm just going to leave this as is and we can move on. So that kind of shows you how we add a bit more detail. Now you got these little kinks in the spline, so it might be worth just taking a look at this and just going through and doing some kind of adjustments with the utilities, resetting everything. I tend to go through and do that quite a bit, but it might just be a case of rotating everything, bringing your tangents into a bit more of a natural position relative to whatever curve you've got and what it's joining onto, so you can start getting rid of some of these kinks. Everyone likes a few kinks, and now every now and then, but roads don't typically kind of have that stuff going on too much. You kind of have these flowing shapes, which I'm sure you can work out yourself. So I'm going to have a little save, because there's nothing worse than your scene crashing after you mess around with this for a while, and this can cause some crashes, so it's good to just be aware of that. Okay, so we've now increased the resolution of our mesh. We know how to swap it out, and we can manipulate it. That's a pretty good sort of stage to get to. The other thing is, like, obviously we're looking at this and it's, roads don't float in the air. They don't go through the ground like this unless they've been there for a few 100,000 years or something. So we want the terrain to match this better. I'm just going to close the utility panel, and I'm sure if you were to just look through this, you can imagine that this one makes the most sense. Landscape deformation, or deformation, deformation, don't know how you pronounce it, deformation, I'm going to go with that. So we open up that one, and you can see we get this lovely set of settings. Now this is one you're probably going to use the most out of all of these tabs, and the most often. So you'll see that there are these two different options: project spline, deform landscape. Project spline is a button that allows you to project the spline to the landscape itself. For me, this kind of acts a bit buggy, to be honest. So personally, I tend to just design it where I'm going to build the landscape to it. That's just my own personal preference. Maybe someone can kind of get this to work nicely, and it would usually be you press it and it kind of adds it to the as best it can to the terrain, and it does work. You can see it's working pretty good overall, and it kind of gives you a good leveling. It levels everything out in a way, but sometimes I find it just doesn't quite work very well, so I don't use it very often, but in this instance it seemed to work pretty good, so that's fine. That basically projects the spline to the terrain in a sort of half decent way. Then you still are going to have these issues, these floating parts, which you can try to manually adapt to, but we're going to actually form the landscape to the road. Now this is the bit that I think takes a bit of experimentation, and it's probably going to bite me in the face, the values that I kind of came up with, but let's go through it quickly. Here we have this landscape drop down, which basically means you just have to select the landscape in the scene. You might have multiple, which is probably never a good idea, in most scenarios, but you have to select the landscape first. This tells the tool kind of what to manipulate. You have your layer name, or you can just kind of forget about that for now. Now these two options tell the tool whether or not it can raise the terrain or lower the terrain, because it might be that for some reason, whatever that might be, you don't want one of those options to happen. You might want it to only raise and not lower. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But those two options are there. Effective width auto. Basically, you have the option here below it to manually change the width of the deform process. So when Unreal does that process, you determine the width. But this auto button basically reads the scale of the mesh itself and just sets that value. So if I was to hit that, you get this value, which happens to be the width of this mesh. If you was to have maybe the 1-lane road instead, let me just do that. We had the 1-lane road in here and we did the same tool. You see it goes down to 321, which is the size of this mesh, which is quite self-explanatory. So if I then just revert what I did to oh no, what was we using the 4-lane, go back to our deform landscape, select auto, yeah, you can see the width is relative to whatever it is in the spline system. Side fall off. This is a value that determines the fall off of the deform. So let's just say, we press the button and it brings the landscape up to the edge or wherever that width is, the edge of the width chosen. The fall off is the value, essentially like the side slope fall off of that option, the width option. Deform offset. Now these are the two values that kind of, well, the project offset is related to this button. The deform offset is related to this button. Now this is the most important one, I find. It might be behaving differently in this project, but I found in my previous attempts on other projects that this -10 value wasn't quite what I needed. But we'll do that once I press the button and I'll show you, or we'll see if I'm wrong. We have here, excuse me, some other features which are related to different tools. We have the blueprint brushes, etc. And you got a little bit of a side note here and some advanced settings. These two I'm not going to bother covering because I don't think they are really that important for learning the kind of overall gist of the tool. So we're going to stick with this. So let's just say we've got our width, we've got our fall off, we're happy. Let's just click the button and see what happens. Bosh. Okay. We've clicked the button, we've seen what happens. We have deformed the landscape. We no longer have the road hidden by the terrain. Now you can see that the grass is still where the terrain was originally. That means I've got to update the auto material, which I will do momentarily, but at the moment I want to kind of lock in the tool itself and why this still looks a bit crap. So basically, when we're looking at this mesh, the spline itself is the mesh itself is made up of the road and then the curb, and then that's a little bit of extra distance. So this road essentially kind of seems to be, this width kind of seems to be the road as opposed to the curb. So what I've found is that some of these values need to be exaggerated a little bit, and the deform offset, let me go real slow. This. the deform offset is okay. And actually in this one it's not seeming so bad. In previous, we probably do have a -10 offset there, which means it's staying -10, a distance of -10 away from the mesh. Let's try again with a fall off of, let's say, 500. Let's just see what kind of thing we get. So you can see now we're starting to spread a little bit further away from the middle, which is cool. Let's go even further. 1000. Okay, we're starting to get a bit more of a natural blend here. But the issue I found is that you still get, these gaps, and it's very difficult to kind of get it right. You can even go real extreme with a 5000 effect, and you're always going to have this curb issue. You know what I mean? You're always going to have this raised bit. And I guess you could say, in different scenes you might hide it, like you'll have some buildings right up against here or whatever, but with this particular asset, that kind of is a bit like, it's a bit annoying. Maybe you would have to adapt the asset to have some dirt mounds on the edge or something like that. But what I found is that it's kind of good to adjust this deform offset to attempt to match it closer to the edge of the mesh. So firstly, it's worth testing 0, and you think, oh, that's not quite right. And you can see now we're starting to pull it up. So I understand why that minus value is kind of preset within the tool, because it means that you get a clean road from the deform option. I'm also going to bring this down to 1000 and reapply. Obviously I've already deformed the landscape, so it's not really going to do anything, and I've kind of gone too far. So it's always good to save or go back, or whatever. I'm just going to save where I am just in case we get a crash. But yeah, with this deform I'm going to have a little mess around, and a value that I found with this particular set of assets is good is 23.5. So deform, and what you see here is we get a much closer match to the edge. That still might not be good enough. I'm going to go for 24 on this one and just see. Oh, still no. Okay, let's try 25. We're creeping up closer and closer. So you can go like for an extreme. 28. Now we know that. Oh, I put 29, sorry. 28. Pop. No, not working. 27. We're really close there. 26.5. Deform. Let's go 25. And yeah, see, it's not so bad, but 26.3. Okay, it's got to be 26, hasn't it? It's got to be 26. Okay, even that, it's not quite right. I'm going to go 25.5. No, I'm not. 25. Okay, final choice. No, I'm only joking. 24.4. 25. Okay. Anyway, the one I use is 23.5 because overall it's pretty good. But it might be different every single time you do it. But generally you get this kind of, you can see the curb all the way. Even though we're not on this time. Which is really baffling me. Because I spent ages doing this before. But, it's basically a lot better. And then what I would usually say is, this kind of matches the curb nicely to the road, to the terrain, all the way through. And then this would basically leave you to go into landscape mode up here. After saving, of course. And then you could get yourself a brush, sorry, sculpt, and we could, you know, go down to 0.1 strength, maybe a width of, what was it? It was like 1,000, wasn't it? So we could go for a width of 700 with a really hard fall off, and we could, you know, once you've done your entire network, just kind of come in and do this and clean up. This is how I would do it, and I know that there's probably someone out there saying, oh, you can automate that by blah 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 or whatever, but this is probably the cleanest way using this tool that I've found, to be honest. I'm not a blueprint kind of guy at the moment. I'm not versed in adapting blueprints. I'm not a programmer. I just kind of work out the best option with tools, and I'm creating probably some funky stuff going on underneath, but this is just a means to an end for me to kind of, you know, get this done and look good. So yeah, I'm just getting my sculpt brush on a really light setting, and I'm going through with you know, shift left click to clean away the terrain on the center, which in turn leaves the edge blended to, as long as you don't go too crazy with the drop, this should really leave the edge matching better than the tool does automatically. Okay. So yeah, we have this nice, obviously the grass is kind of causing some problems, but overall I think you can get the picture. You know, we've got a nice kind of, a nicer kind of blend there. Still a few imperfections, and this is where you probably have to come in and play around with this a little bit more. But generally, that's, you know, that's the gist of it. I think that's quite a good, sort of quite good use of the tool. We have this little dip now, which of course is right there, but not too bad. So let's move on to intersections.